Fellow Agilists, welcome to the premiere episode of Season 4 of the Virtually Agile podcast. One of the central themes in this season is destigmatizing failure and how failure can be reframed as learning opportunities. So we'll be hearing from today's guests about their experiences with failure. We are kicking Season 4 off in style. Today's guest has been a huge influence on my own leadership style. He's a best-selling author of books including Turn the Ship Around and Leadership is Language. A keynote speaker and ex-commanding officer of the USS Santa Fe, a leader who aims to build leaders at every level of an organization. I'm ecstatic to welcome David Marquet to the show.
Thank you, Chris, for having me on your show, and welcome everybody out there.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So, David, for anyone who isn't perhaps familiar with you and your work, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
I grew up in the 70s, maladjusted, introverted, geeky, snot-nosed, know-it-all kid, but I had some deeply held values and beliefs, and they included the idea that we needed to win the Cold War because a world where people had choice in their religion, profession, spouse, sexual orientation, whatever, was a better world. And so for someone like me with the strengths and the weaknesses that I had, the submarine force was the best option. Somehow I stumbled into that. The submarines hide from people, so that was really attractive to me. And I think it was a good decision. I ended up being selected to be a submarine commander, but the rug got pulled out from under my feet when at the very last minute I got sent to command the worst performing submarine in the fleet, which sounds dramatic, but that wasn't really the problem. The problem was it was a different kind of submarine that I ever knew before. And my toolkit for leadership was about making decisions, good decisions, and getting the team to do it. And now I had those tools were largely unhelpful in this situation. We had to design a new toolkit.
So that segues very nicely into my next question. Your books, they center around the concept of intent-based leadership. So David, in your words, what is intent-based leadership? How would you describe it to someone who is new to the concept?
Intent-based leadership is a language that we speak at work that allows people to contribute so they feel valued. In our minds, we tend to hold a couple things that we want in tension. One is distributed decision making. Hey, we're going to treat everyone like adults. We're going to give you the ability to make decisions. You're going to have a sense of agency at work. Yeah, it's all great. But the other thing we want is, in the military, we would call it unity of effort. Like, I want everyone going in the same direction. I don't want each team moving in a different direction. I want you designing the product for this, and you designing the product to achieve that, and not understanding the unity of effort. So we hold those in tension, and we flip flop between either, quote, empowering people, which is good for distributed decision making, but risks it challenges the unity of effort, or I have strict control, which I get tremendous unity of effort, but it's demoralizing because no one gets to think. And we think that you can break that orthogonal relationship with the word intent. You can get both of those things, and you can get both of them in spades. And it's not the way we normally talk. So that's why we say it's a new language. Normally, either we get permission or we just do stuff. And intent gets you the best of both. So we announce what we're going to do before we do it. It's pre-decisional. And the key is it invites feedback. Giving feedback is worthless. Inviting feedback has unlimited value. So only when I give feedback in response to someone who's interested in feedback is it really going to matter. So the idea is to build an organization where people are constantly seeking feedback and wanting to get better, which means you got to put aside your ego in a sense of being defensive about, well, really it wasn't my fault, and geez, we only had the tools we had and everyone tried their best. but product didn't achieve what we wanted it to.
Interesting. Now, what I love about that is the invitation of feedback. And what I think that really nicely leads into is continuous improvement. I'm a huge advocate of continuous improvement in organizations. One of the main proponents of that, I believe, is retrospection. So pausing to reflect on how you're doing, what you could be doing better. And feedback is absolutely key to that. And inviting that feedback, absolutely crucial. Now, tell me, David, why is intent-based leadership particularly relevant in a modern business context? I've seen, for example, examples of how it can be very powerful within organizational change as they adapt to modern agile ways of working. What are your thoughts and experiences here?
Yeah. Well, we're in a transition. We've come through a period of history which we called the industrial age or the industrial revolution. And it's a period where manufacturing was preeminent. And it was also a period where literacy rates went from 5% to 95%. So the fundamental problem that's existed for all time is that to get anything done, you need to use your brain in two different ways. You need to be very expansive in terms of what are we going to do and how we're going to do it, and it's just this decision making and what are the options, and it's a very sort of broad perspective, and you'll feel this. You sort of have this open awareness of what's on the boundary peripheries of your vision. But then we actually need to build the boat. So I get out my hammer, I'm chopping wood, I'm putting nails in. And at this point, I need to focus, otherwise my hammer is going to hit my thumb. And so now I don't want to be distracted, or I'm coding. And I got my headphones on. I don't want to be distracted, and so I narrow the focus. And the industrial organization solved the problem by anointing certain people as the decision makers, and they had a broad perspective on life. And then the doers who ran the machines, and they had a very narrow focus perspective, and that was easy. We didn't need to change. If I was a doer, which the vast majority of mankind was, I didn't need to oscillate between a focused doing perspective and an expansive thinking perspective. But now you do. And this is one of the things that Agile, it's baked into Agile, the rhythm of a sprint and then a retrospective and then a planning. So sprint in the work, retrospective, broad, planning, broad decisions back into the work. And you want to be deeply in the work when you're in the work, and you want to be expansively in the broad part of it when you're in the broad part of it. You don't want to be in the work but always like one ear out for how's it going to change. That's not helpful. So what we do now is you have both modes of thinking, but they occur in the whole team. And instead of having it be these people do the thinking and these people do the doing, we all do the thinking periodically. That's the difference. And so we need to change from this thinking is assigned by role to thinking is assigned by the clock.
And I like that there's this fundamental shift where in the past, you had people directing work. This is how you do it. You've got this time frame. It was all about maximizing productivity. Typically in this industrial age, we've got fixed products we're making, and we're going to maximize as much units as we can out of that time frame. Whereas nowadays, what we're working with a lot of the time is complex work where we don't necessarily know how much time it may take. There is a lot more unknowns, a lot more volatility, a lot more change. And therefore, what we need to do is switch that mindset where instead leaders are coming to those they're working, the doers, and saying, this is the outcome we're heading towards. This is the problem we need to solve. How can we collectively solve it together? And empowering them to come with intent to decide and think, how could we solve these problems?
Yeah, but not talk about it forever. Like actually make a
Yeah.
decision and actually start doing work. And you actually spend more time in the work. But we see this all the time. For example, We have a construction company as a client. I'm on the construction site, and of course, the there's time pressure because we promised the resort's going to be open at a certain day, so people are making reservations to come, and it would be a big embarrassment if it didn't open that day. And we see the activity. We see, for example, the guy with the nail gun going pop, 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 pop. And so my mind is drawn, okay, the way to go faster is to beat on that person. I see him taking a 3-minute coffee break. Come on, you got to get back to work. Like that will have no impact. It might squeeze 0.01% faster. When the guy puts his nail gun down and he says, well, I'm done with this. Now there's a 2-day delay because the windows aren't there. That's where you need to focus. You got to close those seams. That's where you're going to win. That's your job. That's management's job. And over again, what I see is there's a very piecemeal approach, and we don't think of the task across the seams. We're well, I do this, and a lot of it's getting worse, in my opinion, because now we have these little specialists, and I go, oh, I only do this, and then we pass it over to them, and then there's a 4-day gap where nothing happens, and then this happens, and then we have a 6-day gap because we're waiting for a decision, and then we scurry and we try and cram 8 days of work into 7. But meantime, I lost 6 days, so I was waiting for a decision. So what you get with intent is you just launch this. You say, hey, here's what we intend to do. We intend to add these features. We intend to not add these features. We intend to do this testing, not do this testing. We intend to launch the product, not launch the product. And then you don't need a response. It frees you from the burden of the response. It decouples that communication from the progress in the project. And Agile is good. It talks about removing the unnecessary interdependencies. And I see this all the time too. People will say, well, when you send me that, I'll send you this. Like, well, why? You just send it to me. You don't need something from me to send. I see this in my own team. Like, just send it to me now. Anyway,
that's again another thing that I believe is run away. Don't worry. That's another thing I think is powerful about Agile is that it builds into its structure ways of working and capable people, a full end-to-end capability where you're not dependent upon another team to do something because you've enabled the end-to-end capability within the teams. So you're not saying, right, well, you do our part and we'll hand over to you. In fact, what we're trying to do is say, we've got our team that can collectively do all of this and we're empowered to do all of it without having to get X number of decisions. Like we create product owner roles where that person is empowered to make a decision on behalf of people within the business, rather than having to go and wait for this siloed sign-off process that takes time. And we try and avoid this decision paralysis situation, taking a bias towards action. Now, I'm keen to hear David.
I will say this though, because what I see is the software team is excited and they are implementing Agile, and then it runs into the senior vice president for operations or product, some level in the organization, and all of a sudden it all goes, and it's their own fault. We want to blame the dinosaurs that are running the organization, but some things that we Agilists do wrong is we don't use intent. We present it like, well, we decided this. And because we're deciding, we quote, empowered to make the decision. I don't need to talk to my boss. Again, all these things are the wrong approach. And I would say, hey, boss, here's what we intend to do. Here's what I intend to do. Here's what I intend to do. We're having a meeting in 2 weeks to tweak this. We'd love your input then, whatever. But when you say, well, the decision is made, it's just like the team wants to feel like they have autonomy and agency. Your boss certainly wants to feel like he or she's got some agency over the product. And so you're removing that. So it's your own fault. And you want to really be as transparent as possible. We're not doing that. For example, you're driving a car. I'm like, my daughter's learning how to drive a car, was back when. And I'm seeing dangers. I'm seeing little stoplights. I'm seeing family playing and I'm at, hey Emily, do you what? And she's getting miffed. Like, why are you bothering me? Of course I do. And I said, well, I don't know, because you're not saying anything. Because normally we don't say things when we're driving. So well, don't just say what you're seeing, so I know it. Hey, Dad, I see that. I see this. I see that. I see a car coming. If they swerve into my lane, I'm going to react, but I'm not just mindless about driving. Again, so this is the whole idea, is like, well, you did it to yourself. So this idea that somehow I'm going to hunker down and just do my thing and hopefully my boss won't bother me, that's wrong thinking. It's the communication to your boss that earns you the right to do those things.
And you touched upon it, transparency. Again, something that Agile in particular aims to create is transparency. Some of the principles therein are trying to create an environment where people from the business side and those building the work are working together on a daily basis. You've got teams that are building stuff and building feedback loops that enable frequent learning, iteration, adjusting accordingly. So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying there. One thing I do want to pick up on though is I heard you say they, we.
Well, yeah, because I'm not really
Okay,
an agilist, but I do feel I really do support the community, and I think it's great. I'm just like, I don't know, it just came out, but that's interesting. But here's the other thing. You were just talking about. I had a brilliant thought. You were just talking about
I caught you say they
yeah,
we, and it was I know
okay,
you did a leadership nudge recently,
yeah,
right? You
but
did a
let's talk
leadership
about
nudge on this exact topic.
saying, oh, well, we have a status board and you can look at it any time. That is not enough. That is a score 0.1 in the transparency score. That's not enough, because when you're the boss and we've all been there. Okay, now I have, so what is it every day? I got 14 teams. I got to go look through each. No, that doesn't count. Okay, you get no credit for that. You coming to me and saying, hey, we got this critical thing coming up, grab me by the ear, drag me down to where the team's Kanban board is, and say, let me give you a minute to study this. Okay, now what questions do you have? Now let's talk about it. Now let's go from there. That's transparency. Don't think that, oh, well, anyone could look anytime at the thing. Yeah. Plus, I have status boards for all my social media accounts and all that. So that you don't get credit for that. I'm just I'm just beating up on agile people, I feel like, but I love them.
No, I'm not. I'm all for you challenging, right? There's enough people just agreeing with the status quo and being in their echo chamber. I like that you're saying, hey, we could be doing better here. A dashboard that just passively exposes information when someone has got nth level of dashboards to look at. They're not going to get time to that. How often do you even read your emails, let alone going to every little dashboard on a daily basis? So yeah, intent and transparency goes beyond just creating something passive. Go and speak to someone, have a conversation with an individual. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yes. Very good. All right. Over to you.
So I just want to, I want to pull you back to something you mentioned earlier. You said they, and then you corrected yourself and you said we. And actually, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you about. I know it's one of your leadership nudges, and it's linked to your book, Leadership is Language, the hidden power of what you say and what you don't say. So tell me more about that particular use of language. Why we rather than they?
When you say the word we, or we is the word you use to refer to somebody in your tribe, it sends a signal to your brain, this person's in my tribe, I can trust them, and they're a person that I collaborate with. When you say the word they, it's saying this person is not in my tribe. It's a person that I compete with and that I should be very skeptical of trusting. They need to earn trust. Now, we normally view the language as, we say, well, there are these tribes out there. What kind of tribes? Well, we're the C-suite is a tribe, and we're in senior management is a tribe, versus we're in software engineering, which is a totally separate tribe. And They're in marketing. That's a different tribe than product design. So we have all these tribes. And the way we think about it is these tribes are somewhat immutable, and I should choose the word as I'm speaking to match the reality of the tribe. If you want more collaboration, what you want to do, however, is change the word to match what you want the tribal reality to be. So, in other words, rather than just putting up a poster on the wall that says, well, we're one big happy family at XYZ software company, say we're going to refer to each other as we, no matter where you are in the tribe. You may feel initially like you're crossing a tribal boundary, but when you say the word we, since that's the word you use for someone in your tribe, it also works the other way around. When I say it, it's telling your brain this person's in my tribe. And then you feel like they're in your tribe. The feeling comes later. We act our way to new feelings. We talk our way to new feelings. And I saw this on the submarine. It was amazing. People said, "Oh, you guys have the most amazing culture of teamwork," and I laughed. I hated the culture word. It's like, culture. What's that? How do you spell that? I never talked about culture. So, oh yeah, no, but we do have a protocol which we refer to each other as we. Now that's 145 people. You can make that. You can make a tribe that big. If you have 10,000 people in your company, it's going to be harder. But you certainly want the tribe size. I've seen tribal units of one in some companies because there's a big status board. How we're all doing as salesmen. Oh, look, John's like his has got a little horse symbol, and he's way over there to the right, and everyone else is back here. Like, oh, well, I wonder why it doesn't feel like a tribe.
So yeah, the language hugely important. There's a few parallels that I tend to draw in the agile world in particular, especially on the organizational change side of things. A lot of the times I will go and work with a client and I'll observe these tribes or these silos where it's a software engineering team and it's a testing team and it's a marketing team and otherwise. And it becomes oh, we just need to speak to the business. That's the language I hear a lot. We need to speak to the business, not our business. No, not a we phrasing. It's the
Right,
business. And then
right.
it reinforces the fact that you're a silo. They're a separate entity. It's them, their
Who's
thing,
the
right?
business?
Exactly.
Right.
So
Well, not us. It's the
exactly. It becomes a very similar thing. So your use of they, we, I hear it all the time with
yeah,
the business versus our business. And this is something that I encourage
yeah,
people to use instead. Rather than saying, oh, we just need to speak to the business, just say, right, collectively, we are going to work this through together. It's our business. Helps to
yeah,
build that language change and reinforce that culture. A similar one as well, and I like, again, your use of action. Action builds change. So often companies go and say, oh, our company has psychological safety, or a leader will go to people and say, you have psychological safety. We want you to speak out. And people go quiet because saying you have psychological safety does not create psychological safety. It's the actions over time that reinforce and create an environment where you can speak up and challenge the status quo and say something that maybe
right.
you maybe slightly worry might not be agreed with, but that's okay. So, and this is one of the reasons why I'm keen to celebrate failure in particular. Companies that celebrate failure, I find, have a lot of psychological safety because they're creating an environment where people can make mistakes and learn from them.
Yeah.
And that was it's a theme of this particular season. So I know you talk in your book, Turn the Ship Around, David, about a particular failure you experienced when you went onto the Santa Fe for the first time. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and your learning from the experience?
Well, I gave an order that was irrelevant on the submarine, which was very embarrassing. I ordered shifting to second gear on an electric motor that only had one gear. This was a main propulsion motor, so it wasn't like some little side motor in the corner someplace. This was a very basic, fundamental aspect of driving the submarine, and my excuse was I was just sent to the ship at the last minute and I didn't have a chance to learn everything. And it was a different kind of ship I'd ever been on, blah, 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 blah. So, of course, in my mind is rationalizing this, but it's still very embarrassing. It's very sad. And but but out of it came goodness because it forced me to rethink my role as a leader, which I'd always said, well, my role as a leader is to make decisions to get the team to do what I decided for them to do, as opposed to, well, why am I actually deciding this? And it's a little even more nuanced than that. I wanted to be in the role of decision evaluator as opposed to decision maker. So if someone says, here's what I intend to do, I can evaluate the decision and I could veto it, but the initiative and the ownership and the thinking comes from them. If we do the typical thing, which is, no, you just decide, I've removed the decision. There's no decision evaluation mode. I'm only learning afterwards that we did certain things, which is not helpful. It's not what you want. So you want to separate the role of decision maker from decision evaluator, and but you also don't want the most senior person to be the decision maker, because then there's no separation, no psychological separation to decision evaluator. You can see, we do this all day long. I can see how my sisters could do better raising her kids, and my cousin, blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing, they can see that about you. It's so much easier to see what other people can and should be doing than than us to see our own. And that's partly just how we're wired. So it's easier to see flaws in somebody else's decision, and it's easier to see evidence that the decision can be improved than it is on our own. So if you make a decision, just realize you've contaminated yourself and you're no longer uh, unbiased with regards to evidence that will accrue over time as to whether that was the right decision or not. So you see, like, 737, Boeing launched the 737 MAX. The first plane crashes, and Boeing's like, no, it's not our fault. Oh, it's because those guys didn't know how to fly airplanes and all this other stuff. And like, part of it's because they were bad, evil, captured by the wrong objectives, and they had a non-psychologically safe culture. But part of it is just legitimate human biases, which will filter out evidence that it was a bad decision.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And I think, to me, the powerful thing and one of the main takeaways from that book in particular was how an environment such as the US Navy, which is so traditionally command and control in mindset, where you don't expect to be able to flip things around and provide and empower people and create this intent-based leadership model, actually works. And there's a lot of resistance from companies around the world thinking, oh, it won't, this sort of model won't work for us because things are quite regulated and they have to be done in a certain way here. But the fact that it could work in an environment like the US Navy demonstrated to me it could work in many places. So the question I have next for you is, if there was one piece of advice that you would give to anyone looking to develop leaders at all levels, what would it be?
Stop telling people what to do. Control the structure. Look, we all know the story of quality in manufacturing, the Toyota production or the Deming quality, where the old way was you'd have a semi-chaotic process, and then we put inspector at the end who looked at the automobiles and said, good, bad, good, bad, good, 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 bad. And the new way was to bake the quality into the manufacturing process. Well, you want to think about that, your decision-making model, in the exact same way. So product one of your company is cars or software or banking solutions or whatever it is. Product two are the decisions that support that. So we have this exact same situation where we have a chaotic decision-making model, which is all like, who makes this decision? How do they make it? You know how many times someone has handed me a book and says, this is 0. So it's like, well, who makes it? Well, it's embedded in this person's job description. Okay, well, how do they make it? Well, they make it. They talk. Well, again, I won't go into that. But the bottom line is we don't control the process. Therefore, we place ourselves as the inspector at the end of decision making, and we feel like that's our job. It's legitimized. We have the same job as the guy who's checking paint when the car came out of the factory. It's no more glamorous than that. But we pay CEOs. Now, the average CEO depends upon how many companies you go to, but average CEO in the U.S.'s pay last year is 40 million. It's on the order of no, it was 15 million, but it was on the order of 400 times the average pay in the pay of the CEO was on average 400 times more than the average pay in the company for the top 100 companies or something. It's ridiculous. Why? Oh, because they put themselves in this position. Well, I'm not going to really fix the decision-making model, but I get to be the one who says I'm going to make brilliant decisions, and so it's a very personality-based thing, as opposed to like just make a good decision-making model, and then then you don't need the person at the end. So think about your decisions as a product in the same way that you think about the actual product.
Great insights. Thank you for sharing. Now, I've just been reminded of another particularly important language change that I use, right? So when I'm a huge proponent of not referring to people as resources. So you've got human resources departments all across the world still. And my fear is that by calling someone a resource, you can basically dehumanize them. They make them into a line on a spreadsheet, a piece of paper, a pen, a desk, a table, something to be disposed of. So I'm wondering if you feel that's a piece of language that belongs more in the industrial era and should be something that we look to change in the business world.
Yeah, it's terrible because that gets me to product number 3. Humans are not a resource to be exploited in order to make yourself rich or even make the product. The humans are a key product of the organization, whether they leave at the end of their working careers, or they leave for summer holiday, or they leave at the end of their shift and just go home for 12 hours. I think right-thinking leaders understand there's 3 products: the product, the decisions behind the product, and then the people who make the decisions behind the product. And the question is, are these people who are leaving our company the best versions of themselves? Have we set it up so that they can be gracious and relaxed when they're driving and not get upset at some little slide, and when they go home and someone in their family is telling a story, that they can be curious and inquisitive and supporting, as opposed to defensive and fear-based and worried about something that happened at work? And the traditional approach is kind of start on the outside of that shell with what we make, and then think about what the decisions are. And then, okay, maybe we even get to the point where we start thinking about the people making decisions. But I think the path for long-term success is to start on the inside and to start with the people, because only people who are feeling safe, relaxed, comfortable, driven are going to be able to make good decisions that are going to make great experience for the customer, and it'll work for the long run.
One thing I do on a day-to-day basis is when I hear someone referred to as a resource, we just need more resources, I tend to just challenge that and say, what do you mean by that? Do you mean a person, or do you mean like a server, or a piece of software, or some code, or something like that? And if you do mean those latter things, call it that, rather than referring to people as resources. So I aim to challenge it, because I think unless we challenge it, it remains the same language. It's something that we continue using day to day. Right, David, I asked everyone who... Sorry, go ahead.
I just have a personal experience where I spoke at a conference where the speakers were all labeled resources, and I really I've spoken with this organization a couple of times, and the first time I was really pissed off about it. I felt diminished. And I don't think it's a good practice, but my reaction also wasn't that helpful. And the second time I went back, I really tried to change it. And I stood on stage and say, look, I'm really happy to be a resource for you. Because in a sense, I was a resource for these business leaders. And that was honest. That was true. I think I was letting my ego get in the way a little bit. So on the one hand, I don't think we should call people resources, but on the other hand, if your company does have a HR department, it is what it is. Don't just still be the best version of you.
Yeah. And I always aspire to, as a leader, create an environment where people can be their best selves in their best day and be supported on their worst day. That's what I aim for.
That's good.
Right. I ask every guest on the show, David, to add something new to my backlog, a new template, a retro, or an idea for an experience I can create. And I think I alluded to, with your permission, I would love to create something around intent-based leadership. So perhaps a retrospective, perhaps a meeting that's themed around trying to bring more intent-based leadership into the workplace. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it depends on how much time and energy you want to put into it. I think any anything that you could do to help bring it to life, we tend to use movies, scenes to show how teams working together, or maybe not so much working together. But any kind of a little script with maybe a group of people in a meeting and I have to make a decision, or maybe it's just an imaginary decision about launching 737 Max, or that's what we're really talking about, but it sounds like we're talking about bottled water. In any event, yeah, anything like that. I like also, what actions are you going to do? So, for example, we have a series of nudges and things that, like go when you go to the restaurant, see if you can get the server to choose. So for us, empowerment isn't a concept; it's a practice that you have to practice over and over and over again with your kids when you're interacting in social situations. So you get to practice at the restaurant. Like, can you quote empower the server to choose for you? What's involved with that? When will they say no? When do they say yes? What's the difference? When do you do it? When do you not do it? What's the difference? Can you be aware of that? But again, it doesn't happen just by sitting in bed and thinking about it. It happens by going out and interacting with human beings.
Again, actions create change, right? Repeated actions, consistency, I find, creates results. Right. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show. I just want to offer you, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners at all, David?
I think leadership is hard. I think it's always a balance. I think the world of the future is going to reward people who can they can do stuff. I'm not a huge fan of the person who's just, oh, I'm just a networker. I put people together. Like, there's a role, but just maybe from my own background, because I'm not good at that, I tend to diminish that. I think you need to be able to do stuff, but then get the team to work together and allow them to do it. And it's a balance between how much structure are you going to impose, and I use that word kind of deliberately. Like, if you say this is how we're going to run the meetings, we're going to do a stand up at 8, between 8 and 8:15. Like, it's the stand up between 8 and 8:15. Don't sit down. It's stand up, or whatever the rule is in the meeting. Don't look at me. That was one of my rules. And we always had the meeting standing in a circle. Everyone was looking at me. I was like, why are you looking at me? Oh, because it's your company. Like, don't look at me. Look at each other. So it's hard, but you're making a better world. And don't forget about the people who are like right next to you. Like, the customer's way out there. You got people who sit like right next to you and across the table. Those are the people. Take care of those people.
I saw a very powerful quote recently on that exact topic, and it was centered around the notion that you shouldn't focus just on the stakeholders, Focus on the people within your company, and they will in turn create great value for your stakeholders, your shareholders. Yeah. So
Right.
great final thoughts.
Customers not number one. Customers not number one. Your people are number one.
Couldn't agree more. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, David. We are always looking for new guests to appear on the show, so do reach out if you'd like to be involved. For one of the largest collections of templates for all things agility on the web, do check out www.thevirtualagilecoach.co.uk. And if you want to stay up to date with the latest in virtual agility, don't forget to subscribe to my mailing list on the website. As always, folks, don't stop believing.